bloody.
It's a will they won't they? Is that what you're telling me? Give me the rom-com version of Falcon and Winter Soldier.
Welcome back to Digital Spy. So, we're not able to sit around in the office and chat about our favourite shows quite like we used to, but that hasn't stopped us from connecting to talk about Disney Plus's latest Marvel show, The Falcon and the Winter Soldier. Woo. Woo-hoo. So, episode 1 has just dropped. Let's get started. Ali, what were your first thoughts?
So, I think it's weird, like sitting down to talk to you. We did one of these for Wandavision, and I think we were both so like high on Wandavision from like even before it started, because we're both big fans of those characters, and we were excited. We knew a bit about what the show was going to be like, and so we kind of brought that energy into watching the first episode. And for me, I didn't have that same kind of like connection or excitement about Falcon and Winter Soldier, so that kind of definitely tempered my expectations. So going into it, I was kind of expecting it to be good, but not expecting it to be blown away. And honestly, that's kind of where I landed. Like, there was some stuff that I really liked, some really good beginnings of characterization. And I think as a show, it's going to be much more about, you know, character development and character work and these kind of dynamics between obviously the two leads and also their kind of different personal relationships, than a sort of bigger mystery. I don't think there's going to be that kind of, or as far as we know yet, there's not going to be those kind of bigger theory kind of mystery moments that we had so much of in Wandavision. So yeah, I liked it, but I think it kind of, there are some issues I had, which maybe we can talk a little bit about in more detail, but around like the structure, and some of the kind of pacing of this first episode felt a little bit off to me. But overall, I liked it. But yeah, it just kind of left me wanting a little bit more.
Yeah, I know what you mean. It's funny because I also went in kind of a bit lower expectations than WandaVision, because, you know, like I was obsessed with the WandaVision characters, and, you know, I mean, Anthony Mackie and Sebastian Stan are very aesthetically pleasing to look at. But character-wise, they haven't been the most thrilling. Although I guess that's the point of these shows to some degree as well, isn't it? To highlight those side characters and give them a chance on spotlight. But it was funny because I had those low expectations, but in a way that made me ended up liking it more, because I went in already thinking, oh, it'll be fun, it'll be fine, a bit generic. But then, so then I was a bit surprised that it went a bit deeper than I expected, and like it wasn't as exciting, like you say. There's not huge mysteries. Like, we already knew about that stinger at the end, which we can talk about more from the trailers. But I think it has potential.
Yeah.
I think it's a shame it came after WandaVision, to be honest. I think it's a shame that, because originally it was supposed to come first, obviously, and then COVID did its thing, and yeah.
I think it's I think there's something interesting. I mean, on that note, like, I think in a few years, I think it'll be interesting to look back at what like Marvel's Phase 4 ended up looking like, and what the structure of it was compared to what that initial plan was, you know, when Kevin Feige stood on stage back in 2017 or whatever it was, and was like, here's, you know, the next 5 years, and we had Doctor Strange 2 was coming out this day, and, you know, we were supposed to have a very different structure. And I think, and it's of no fault of Falcon and Winter Soldier really, that it kind of came after we like me and you especially were so high on WandaVision. The bits that didn't work for me, like overall I loved that show, and so it was always facing a bit of an uphill struggle, and I think what will be interesting from my point of view will be to see how the show manages to kind of carve its own path, right? Like, we started to see that already, where it's like much more of a show about like character, which is silly to say, but much more kind of a character development driven thing than WandaVision started out being, which really surprised me. Like, we got so much more like stuff from kind of Sam Wilson and Bucky Barnes' like personal life that I wasn't expecting, and that stuff I think worked for me on overall the episode. Like, those kind of couple of key moments of Sam interacting with his sister and like them talking about their parents' boat was a really nice, like, kind of gave us a side of that character that we just like obviously had no idea about from the films. And same with Sebastian Stan and Bucky. Like, we'd seen obviously like, oh, we know he's got the Winter Soldier memories and he's gonna have to deal with that kind of the trauma of what he did. But seeing that stuff, like him going on that first date and him, you know, making friends with that guy, like seeing that stuff was a surprising kind of twist and something that I actually ended up really enjoying.
Yeah, I mean, those are the aspects I definitely like the most. And it was interesting because when I was watching it, it kind of gave me WandaVision parallels, just in the sense that this show is also exploring trauma and grief to different degrees in ways we've never really seen in the wider movies before. But then also, I don't think that's a deliberate parallel by any means. I guess it's just more the fact that the the writers have all this extra time because it's a TV show. So by its very nature, they have time to breathe and really delve into that psychology, which, yeah, I really appreciate it, especially for Winter Soldier. I think he's been Falcon's been sidelined too, but at least he still had agency, whereas Winter Soldier was also just brainwashed for most of the time. And then he was just Steve's buddy. Like, so there was almost nothing going on with him. So I really appreciate like the nightmare scene and that twist. Can we talk about that little twist with the gun?
The little twist. Yeah, it's that was good. That was a kind of nice little mini reveal. So what we're talking about there, I guess, is, I mean, maybe it's worth setting up. Presumably, if you're watching the video, you've seen the episode, but like the kind of rough structure of it is we have that Falcon. It opens with the Falcon kind of action scene. Then we have like, I'd say roughly half the episode of like, which is Falcon going to meet his sister, them working out what they're going to do about their parents' boat, which is kind of how his sister wants to sell the boat. The fishing boat was sort of how their parents made a living. We have some scenes there between the two of them. We get a moment where Falcon kind of admits that he doesn't want to be the new Captain America, and then the episode kind of flips, and we get the Winter Soldier side of things. So we have this Sebastian Stan as Bucky Barnes has this nightmare where he kind of relives the experience of assassinating these people and accidentally killing this bystander. Then we see him interact with some people like that he's friends with, this older man that he's like buddies with. They go to a bar, he gets up on a first date, and those are kind of the two halves of it. And yeah, like you say, there's this reveal in that second part with Bucky where in the nightmare scene we see him shoot that witness that was like a student or someone that was like on a corporate retreat, and then we find out that the old man he's like best friends with is that guy's dad, and that was like a surprising like gut punch. I didn't see that coming, which is, I mean, like that's fun, that's good storytelling, but it was a nice like, and it gave you insight into that idea that Bucky is trying to make amends, which is what he talks to his therapist about, and it was definitely that like, it got me a little bit. I was quite like impressed with it, and it was sad. Like it's sad that guy's obviously devastated about what happened to his son, and then Bucky's right there.
It was brutal. It was brutal. You mentioned the therapy scene as well, which I really enjoyed, and I feel like from what we've seen in the promotional material, that's going to be playing a bigger role, especially when Falcon comes into it. But do you think, when I was watching it, I appreciate that they took the time to set up both individual stories. I do think that's important, but then I also wonder, do you think the show suffers a bit just from not having that chemistry? Because I feel like that chemistry is such a huge sell, that kind of bromance. Yeah. They like each other, but they don't, and they're like buddy.
It's a will they won't they? Is that what you're telling me?
I mean, this is something I'm making up.
Give me the rom-com version of Falcon and Winter Soldier. Maybe I'm projecting. Yeah, I think definitely, like that was a big part of the draw of the show, like the way people have been talking about it as this kind of like buddy cop drama comedy thing, and like in the trailers lean obviously very much on chemistry between Anthony Mackie and Sebastian Stan, and we saw that in like Civil War. They have those great moments, like their dynamic is really fun on screen, and you see it in like junkets and stuff, the way they bounce off each other. So yeah, it was kind of sad that we didn't get any inkling of that in this episode, and given that it was, compared to WandaVision, it was a full-length TV episode, right? It was 40 minutes. So to not have that to not set up the central conceit of the show in the first episode kind of felt like a missed opportunity, maybe. And yeah, like you say, like I would have loved to have them bouncing off each other. I would have loved to have, because you're already seeing like the differences between what they're going through and the similarities. And yeah, it was a shame that they weren't like brought together at the end, and there wasn't the kind of meet cute where they were like both of them. Now I'm just pitching the rom-com, but like they didn't like bump into each other at a coffee shop and have to go on a first date. Like it would have been nice to have an interaction between the two of them to kind of round out the episode.
Yeah, in hindsight, that kind of feels like the obvious ending to me, and not in an obvious bad way, just in this is naturally where it's going to head, so why not set that up in the beginning? I kind of wish I put that in my review now. I totally didn't think about it.
Well, I think we spoke a little bit before the call about how there's a lot of conversation around when WandaVision was on, like, whether it was working as a weekly TV show, whether people would have preferred it as a bingeable drop, whether it should have been a movie, like, and how the structure and the format of the show impacted viewing experiences. And I think with WandaVision, it's really complicated because WandaVision is a TV show about TV, and so you have this like meta layer of the reason it works weekly in some ways is because it can lean on TV tropes, and like there's the great moment at the end of episode 4 of WandaVision when Wanda rolls the credits mid-conversation, and like stuff like that, you kind of is a really great kind of exploration of what you can do with TV as a format. And I don't know whether with Falcon and Winter Soldier, it will, when we get to the end of it, obviously it's shorter, it's only 6 episodes, whether it will feel more like, oh, this should have been a movie than a TV show. Because for me, this first episode especially didn't have that. It very much felt like the opening half an hour of a movie, much more than it did the first episode of a show, because there wasn't an arc there. We didn't have, like you said, a more kind of, the obvious route, the route A option would have been, you set them up as 2 separate characters, they're dealing with their own personal stuff, and by the end of the first episode, they kind of dovetail together, and that sets us up for what's going to come in episode 2. And we didn't have that. So yeah, I think it's interesting. It'll be interesting to see how the structure of watching it weekly kind of affects the flow and the pacing of the show.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, because I think, I know people objected to WandaVision being dropped weekly, but I just think that was people being impatient and just greedy, wanting that binge life. Because WandaVision, to me, it lent itself so perfectly to the weekly format because of the overarching, because of the mysteries, because of the cliffhangers, because of, like you say, the actual meta format on it. Whereas Falcon, it does feel like they are treating it like a movie. Like, that's just been stretched out. Like, even I interviewed the director, Carrie Scogland, and she actually specifically discussed it as a movie, like more than once, which I found really interesting because, yes, it is a movie to some degree, but you still have, knowing that it's going to drop weekly, you still have to be aware of that when you. Definitely. I know she wasn't the writer, and there's no criticism here, but it's just it's a conversation that needs to be thought about, and I don't know how much that was taken into consideration.
Yeah, like this feels like a show that maybe, I mean, it's so early for me to say this, but like you can see a world in which this is if it was a Netflix style like drop where it's like all 6 episodes are available now, maybe that would work. Maybe it will seem like the flow would make more sense then, like, because you often get that with Netflix shows where it doesn't matter so much that there's not an arc in each episode, because you can watch the next one immediately, and so you can kind of thread the needle a bit better. But when you are doing a weekly show, I kind of, from my point of view, you need that pacing to keep people coming back week on week. You have to have like some feeling of completeness in each episode, and maybe that was missing.
That was missing, but they do have the way the first episode ended. It did end with that kind of cliffhanger, which they're hoping people back. You know, who is this new Captain America that the government has sanctioned? How did you feel about that? Because I know that Marvel have already discussed it a bit, so it wasn't as secretive and mysterious as WandaVision's mysteries were.
Yeah, I mean, it was cool. Like, I think it's so tricky with these shows because I try and go in to the extent that you can, like, go in not knowing too much. But obviously, with Marvel stuff, it's like, well, if you know the comics or you are around, like, just culturally, people talk about this stuff all the time. And so I know that character that was revealed to us at the end, he's a character from the comics, right? Or he's a version of a character in the comics called the US Agent, and it is this kind of like, the US military steps in, replaces Captain America with kind of one of their own to work out, to kind of put a best foot forward. Because we have that scene earlier in the first episode of Falcon and Winter Soldier where Sam gives that speech at the Smithsonian, which was very cute. Like, if you remember in Winter Soldier, Smithsonian is where Sam and Cap first meet. Like, there's some that, I thought that was really sweet. And in that speech, he's like, basically says, you know, the shield is only a symbol. Like, it was Steve Rogers who was important, which I thought was cool. When setting that up of like from Bucky and Sam's point of view, you can't just replace Steve by giving someone else the shield, because Steve is the symbol. Like, his personality, his drive was what's important there. And obviously we see that flipped at the end of this, because obviously from the point of view of that guy, the military, whoever, they're like, no, like the shield, the uniform, that matters. Like, we can just put someone else in it and that'll serve the same purpose. So yeah, it was cool. And that guy, White Russell, I think is the actor.
Yes, yeah.
His shit-eating grin is all I can describe it at the end, where he just like walks out and he's so like, yeah, the smile is so wide, and you're like, okay, this guy, he's not going to be a good guy. I can tell immediately. He's so smug, like. So yeah, it did work for me in the end. It was such a short stinger as well, so yeah, it was good.
I thought, like you say, that grin really was a really smart way of encapsulating already who that character is within one frame or 1 second. Because that is very much John Walker in the comics, and I'm sure. Obviously, Marvel like to twist things a little bit when they adapt stuff, but I definitely think they're drawing quite heavily on that whole US agent storyline, which basically explores patriotism and the dark undercurrent of patriotism and why it's a positive thing, which I think up until now the MCU hasn't really reckoned with. Captain America's always just been, it's Captain America, therefore he loves America, America's great, he's a good guy. But obviously, I mean, more than ever, this has always been the case, more than ever in real life, you know, patriotism is not always not always can be seen in a favourable light, let's just say.
Completely.
Yeah, so I think there's potential for the show to be really interesting in that sense and really explore that complexity and the morality of it all. But also, it's Marvel and it's for the masses. So will they go that far? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, this is like, I think it's a big conversation, and maybe not one episode in, it's hard to make that call, right? But you are totally right. And I think what the MCU has done, like the trick of the Captain America character within the MCU, is that they've kind of taken him outside of that, like, or in the script, they've taken him out of that kind of like nationalist, patriotic state. Like, in the first Avenger, he fights for America in World War II, but the role, like the idea of Captain America in those movies is that, he has the flag on the shield and he's called Captain America, but we don't often engage with the idea of like what that means as a name, and like the movies aren't all set in America in that way. Like, they managed to kind of swerve some of the bigger conversations that should be had about like, why is this character called Captain America and what does that nationalism mean? And hopefully, best case scenario, Falcon and Winter Soldier wants to talk about that more. And like, maybe if I was giving it the benefit of the doubt, like maybe it will do that. Like, this end of episode 1 sets up some interesting things, and the bad guys in this series are called the Flag Smashers. Like, if you're not going to call them that ironically, then I'm going to challenge it. Like, you need to have this conversation about like why is patriotism important, and what kind of stuff comes from that. So we'll see. I guess I'm kind of withholding judgment for now because the cynic in me wants to like criticize it, but I'm going to see where we get to in an episode or two.
Yeah, it's got potential. I think the flag smashing aspect is particularly interesting too. Like, as far as I remember in the comics, I think Flag Smasher is just one guy. But so the idea of creating this covert group who will unite in this name is also kind of an interesting play on what we've been talking about, that nationalistic vibe. So we'll see. Another thing I thought was interesting was the blip in general, because the blip inspired the Flag Smashers. So it's really interesting to see the realities of life post blip in the MCU. Wandavision was the first to kind of touch on this, which I really appreciated, with Monica's character and the loss of her mother, and when they all popped back into the hospital, and that really
so good. Great moment.
How do we feel about that kind of?
I think it's really interesting. I think earlier you said about like, Falcon and Winter Soldier is like doing the grief, is like almost like already a story about grief, like just like WandaVision was. And I think the interesting thing about the MCU at the start of Phase 4 is that like the thing that happens at the end of Phase 3 is that like everyone in the world goes through this massive like 5 years of mourning. Like, everyone, like lots of people die, and that sets the tone and the stage for a world that like is dealing with grief kind of en masse. And so I think it's interesting that these shows, certainly these two, are engaging directly with it, because they kind of have to, because the context that all of these characters are living in is a world where like everyone for 5 years thought their loved ones had died, and now they've all been brought back, and like grief is so kind of interwoven in that, which I think is really interesting. And that sets up the blip to be this kind of really cool thing that the shows can talk about and engage with. And I really liked that as an idea, and bringing that into the shows. Like, we have the scene where Sam and his sister go to get the loan, and they talk about like, where have you been for 5 years, and that stuff I thought was really cool. And his sister's like, everyone was dead for 5 years, like of course you haven't got work history for that time. Like, that was really, like, that stuff really interests me, like, all the little bureaucracies and things that get kind of screwed up when half the people disappear for 5 years, and that was really cool. The stuff like, there's even little moments like when Bucky goes on the date, and the woman is like, have you dated much since like post blip or something? Like, there's a little moments like that are really cool. So I think it's a really interesting backdrop to tell a story in.
Yeah, I really appreciate it, because I feel like, particularly in superhero storytelling and comic books, the storylines reset themselves so often, especially in the comics. And I feel like the MCU shouldn't have, but it could have kind of glossed over a bit what happened and been like, everything's kind of fine now, let's not talk about it too much. So I think it's quite impressive that they are taking this time to really delve into that. And it creates a more fully realized world. Like you say, there's all these little details that remind you that this is a different world than ours. And then I also appreciate how it kind of just unites everything, like not in an Easter eggy kind of comic book geeky way, but it also really unites every single show and film involved to really combined, unified world in a way that Marvel's never really been able to do before as well, particularly, the Marvel Netflix shows, bless them.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's so cool. Before we move on, like that's one of the cool things about like phase 1 and I guess the end of phase 2, whenever the Avengers is, the end of Avengers, like one of the cool things about all the movies that came off that were when people were like, oh, the Battle of New York, like people talking about the thing that happened in New York, like, because that's like the cool thing about comics, both in terms of comic books and storylines, is like you get these overarching threads that like people can bounce in and out of, and like that was such a cool thing earlier in the MCU, was that idea that people would make reference to the Battle of New York, and it felt like it made the world feel so much bigger. And I think having the blip as this central idea that every character has some relation to is really cool.
It got to a point where the Avengers battle became like almost like a joke, because the Marvel Netflix shows would never connect, but they were like, oh, if we mention the Avengers battle once a season, then we're part of the MCU.
yeah.
It got a bit good at first, and then it got a bit silly for me. But hopefully, I think the blip definitely will.
Yeah, definitely.
That's more stronger.
The other thing I was going to ask you, I guess briefly, was just like, was there anything beyond these big like theme stuff and setting stuff? Like, were there any scenes that, like you mentioned the therapy stuff, like were there any scenes that kind of stood out to you beyond that? Because like I said, some of the show worked for me and some of it didn't, but I just wondered whether there was anything that really worked for you, like on an individual kind of scene basis.
Yeah, I mean, the therapy scene was a highlight for me. On a geeky comic book level, I did really appreciate when Rhodey and Sam were in the Smithsonian, and they were chatting about Captain America's legacy, and in the background there's all the Captain American memorabilia, and it was all the stuff from the films. But there was also, I think there were a few Easter eggs. I didn't pause it long enough to look properly, but I did see the very first Captain America comic book cover ever. The one
cool.
Which is cool, where he punches Hitler.
Yeah, very cool.
So I was like, oh, that's nice, because it's treating the comics like they're a real thing within the MCU, so I thought that was cute. But aside from that, also the Falcon fight scene I enjoyed, but I thought it was very impressive technically, and I was like, oh, this feels like a Marvel film. I would love to see this on the big screen, and I think it would have more impact. But on my small screen, just watching Falcon flip around the cannon and the helicopter, it did feel a bit generic, a little bit like too Iron Man-y. No offense. Do you know what I mean? How did you feel? Yeah, I mean,
I think those are two things I would pull out. Like, I liked the opening sequence. Obviously, the episode opens with that Falcon sequence, and like him. I don't know. It just reminded me a lot of Iron Man. Like having like the US Army front and center in that way, and him talking about the Air Force was very Iron Man 1. And that scene when he like lands on the plane and they jump into the fight in the plane, I was like, this is Iron Man 1 / Dark Knight Rises. Like I've seen stuff like this in a similar way. But when the guys put the wingsuits on and he's like flying around in the air fighting, like that was cool. Like there was some cool bits, and I love the bit when they get to the border between Tunisia and Libya, and he's like, oh, like we can shoot him down, like he'll never catch up to us. And they turn around and like Sam's like in the helicopter. Like there's some funny visual stuff. So it did work for me, but yeah, it wasn't the most. For the opening scene of this new Marvel show, I was a bit like, oh, it lacks a bit of punch.
I wonder if part of that is also, no offense to Falcon, but I feel like his power set is also not the most fascinating. At least with Iron Man, he's got so many different things. He's just got wings, and he's got a little bird robot, who I do appreciate. I do everything. But,
yeah, I get what you mean. Like, yeah, Falcon is cool, but yeah, and I think we're seeing that he's doing, like, there's some cool stuff that he does with the suit, and I think the people that are directing those scenes with him in it, both in the movies and in the show, are getting that like they need to make it more interesting visually, and so they have the scenes where he like the wing flips around and like blocks the bullets. Like there's some cool stuff they're starting to do, but yeah, it's not the most impressive thing. But I was gonna say, yeah, I did really like the therapy scene as well, just because what I'm hoping is this show's secret weapon is going to be Sebastian Stan's comic timing, because I actually think he delivers some lines in a really funny way in that moment. So I'm hoping that once we get him and Sam interacting, like we'll get some cool, some kind of good banter, which is kind of what you want from this type of show. What we think is going to come next, like what are we excited to see happen over the next 5 episodes of this show?
I mean, obviously, like we mentioned, Bucky and Sam, I'm just excited to see them together. And not just in a queer baiting sense, but just in actual, their chemistry is great on screen, and that'd be fun to see.
I'm excited to see what I'm hoping, and maybe I'll just make them, is like the legions of like fan edits and fan cams of the re-edit of Falcon and Winter Soldier, which does make it like a rom-com version. I would happily watch 20-minute edit of these episodes.
Captain America's exes, find out. It writes itself.
Yeah, I think, yeah, like you say, that they're seeing them together, which is the whole crux of the show, is what we're excited for. And then beyond that, I guess, you know, this episode was so much setting up their two personal lives and where they are. And now I'm kind of ready to see some more of the world. Like, I'd like one thing we didn't talk about in terms of scene setting, and which will, like, I guess we're going to see a lot more of going forward, is like a scene that really did work for me was the Flag Smasher scene. Like, it was just, there was something really cool about it. There was something very like Money Heist about them all handing out the masks, and the guy jumps out the window, and he's obviously got like superpowers, which is cool because we have no context for what his kind of like meta-human stuff is. So that moment where he like jumps out, they hand out the mask, and they're all like running around the plaza, like that really worked for me, and that was a really cool. That felt very Russo brothers. That felt very Civil War. Like suddenly there was like real pace to the action.
I have a theory. I've seen this theory online too, that I think the Flag Smashers are linked somehow to the Super Soldier serum.
Yeah, I understand. Because how did what? Because there was like so. Yeah, so this is things we're excited about include like theorizing about stuff, right? And so I'm the end, that stinger at the end when we get introduced to Wyatt Russell's character, this new kind of faux Captain America. Like I'm in my head, I'm like, does he have super strength? Is he a metahuman? Because if he does, and he is, like, what does that mean? Like, I didn't know we were doing that. Basically, I didn't know that the U.S. Army were. I mean, it makes sense, right? But we had no context that the U.S. Army was developing their own super soldier serum. But we did see this guy who has super strength, and my brain was immediately like, oh, maybe they're the same person. Like maybe the leader of the Flag Smashers is also US agent, or like there's some connection there, yeah, because we've got no context for otherwise how they'd have powers.
In the comics, was actually kind of stronger than Captain America. Actually, like he beat Captain America the first time. So I think if they're gonna want to play around with him potentially having conflict with Bucky and Sam, it's 2 against 1. He's gonna have to be a threat. Although, like you say, maybe he does have the Flag Smashers under his control, or perhaps even they're all led by the same operatives within the government. Yeah, there's definitely some connections that hint at. It's not as like deep as WandaVision. It's not as like mind-boggling. Like, but it's still interesting, I think. And I think. Yeah. Like, and it kind of ties in again to what we were saying about nationalism and what that means.
Yeah. And I think we're talking around it a little bit because like we're so early in the show that I don't want to cast judgment. But yeah, I want to see how those themes, if they engage with those themes, if they pay off. You know, there's lots to dig into there about the Flag Smashers are like an online group that have organized kind of remotely, and you know, what does that mean? Like, this is stuff that's interesting there, and hopefully they'll be able to dig into. The other thing that I'm very excited about, which we have no hint of yet, is Daniel Bruhl. We're getting him back. We're getting Baron Zemo. Big fan of the character from the comics, and also like, and I know retroactively people have decided they don't like Zemo from Civil War as a villain, but like he's like by far one of my favorite antagonists in the MCU. So I'm so excited to have Daniel Bruhl on screen again. Like, I think he's such a good actor. He does such good like sneaky menace, and like in Civil War he's so like, there's something so sinister about his normality, and I'm really excited to see that kind of on screen again and see him kind of chew the scenery a little bit.
Yeah, you really nailed it with that normality comment, because I feel like, you know, Marvel, there was always that Marvel villain problem for the first 2 or 3 phases. Everyone was pointing out every villain is generic or like an inverted mirror version of the hero. Whereas he was one of the first that was really, he had his own motivation, and a motivation that was also understandable and relatable, which is kind of what makes the best villains so great.
Yeah, completely.
So yeah, I'm really excited. I guess my only apprehension is I don't want them to go too comic booky with him, because like you say, his normality was what.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
And like, as cool it is to see like Baron Zemo on screen, like, amazing. I just hope he doesn't get too melodramatic and pantomime.
Yeah, and I mean, he's already got the powerful mask. I'm excited to see. Yeah, I think that's my ending note would be. Excited to see what happens. I want to see Daniel Bruhl do well, but yeah, again, it's threading this line, isn't it, between over the top comic bookness with what makes those characters interesting. And yeah, like, do I want to see Daniel Bruhl as Zemo setting up Thunderbolts? Yes. Do I want to see like this lead to much bigger things? Yes. But also, I'd be really happy with the show engaging with a few themes well and giving us some good performances. And it's like not, I don't think too much to ask. But yeah, that's kind of what I'd want to happen going forward.
So that's what we think about the Falcon and the Winter Soldier. But we would love to know what you guys think. So please let us know in the comments below.
Yep. And don't forget to like and subscribe to Digital Spy's YouTube channel for all the latest from the MCU. Come back to hear us talk about future episodes, the ending, any big mysteries. And you can follow us on social media at Digital Spy on Twitter, facebook.com/Digital Spy UK. And you can find us everywhere on Instagram, TikTok. So give us a like and see what we're up to.